Well, it's been, I guess, about 15 weeks since I really preached the sermon, and so what's another week, right? But I thought as we were talking this week, or as we were putting things together this week, what do I want to do the first Sunday back? And so I just had this idea, well, let's just do what we've been doing one more time. Luis, you want your phone? And so I got a few things I want to say, and then we're just going to open it up to anyone else. And also, if you're watching on Facebook, and we've got a lot of people on Facebook, feel free to chirp in, give a one-sentence testimony. I'll read it on the phone if you comment, and we'll just go that way. Are we about 6 feet apart?
Maybe I should.
Yeah, yeah. Let me get my water just in case.
2 arms length.
2
arms length.
2 arms length? Okay. Your arms are mine.
I know.
One of the highlights for me, at least, I guess, out of all this COVID was once a week, more than once a week, but at least once a week, hanging out with Kevin, doing our discussion, our lesson, and all the help, Brad and Jessica with the sound, getting your comments about what was in the background. You know, at first it started out being an accident. First time Michael sang with us and we recorded Michael, there was like brooms and everything in the background. And people gave me a hard time about that. So then we started placing stuff on purpose in the background just to see. No, the diapers were an accident. Play on word there. Diapers accident. You got it. The milk was an accident also. But anyway, so you could tell we're not professionals doing this, but it was a lot of fun and a lot of positive comments about that approach. You know, I had one discussion with a guy who was pastor of a large church, and I was telling him, he was asking what we were doing on Sundays, and I explained to him our format of just having this conversation because we don't have the ability to do a production, you know, just like he did, and just have this conversation. And he said, you know, after our first week, the response we got back was, why don't you just sit at home with a Facebook and just talk? And so he said, so what you're doing is really what people wish that we would do instead of having the big, trying to have a big production. So, Kevin, that's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun just doing the podcast with you. But the last about 13 times, right, that we did it, that's just been a lot of fun. It's been a highlight for me. And Brad and Jessica, thank you for your help in all of that. And so we're going to do it again this week. But we do want to open it up for you to share. But the question is, you know, it's been 3 months, so what has God taught you in the last 3 months? And I'll let you go first if you want to say anything.
Oh, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot to try and make sense of. I don't know if everybody else is kind of having the same struggle of, all right, so what am I supposed to glean from 3 months? I feel like I've had a privileged situation and everybody should do church this way, where you meet once a week one-on-one with your pastor and your best friend, and you guys like talk about God and the Bible, and you get an outline, you know, days in advance to come into the conversation. So I'm grateful for the last 15 weeks or so. Like, it's just spiritually, personally, it doesn't feel like the shutdown has been a negative for me, although there's negatives to it. One thing, I mean, you mentioned the going door to door in the giving communion to the community, and that was one thing that I learned is when you hear it once that, you know, Jesus said, take of the bread and do this and that, but when you hear it 15 times in a row, it starts to sound like, and then Jesus took of the bread, said, take of the bread, and you take of the bread and you do this with the bread, and it started to sound Italian and everything. I was like, oh man, you stand there with the garbage bag holding it. But it was an impactful time to be out in the community.
Luis and I could write a book on our experience.
Oh, I'm sure.
Of doing communion in the neighborhood. Yeah, there was one Hispanic family that we would stop at every week, and that was fun watching Luis be able to do communion completely in Spanish. Yeah. So that was fun. I thought I was in Honduras every week. So thank you.
I mean, I had a few thoughts. I'd really love to hear. I'm looking forward to hearing everybody here today, because we've kind of been in this isolated bubble at the community center. For me, a big one is just realizing that that somebody else's reality may not be my own reality. And then how do you exist in that? How do you love people through that? And, in the midst of the quarantine and the illness part of it, that's like one aspect. But then you throw into it the racial aspect and the turmoil in our country at this time. And I look at, my hometown in Washington State, it's like 1 in 13 people are testing positive for coronavirus. So their reality is not my reality. On the reservation where Mandy's from, people are burying 2-3 members of their own family plus. That reality isn't my reality. For our friends who are people of color, their reality is not my reality. People who work in law enforcement or have friends that are in law enforcement, that reality is not my own reality. So it's like we've been thrown in this situation where God says, all right, your reality isn't somebody else's reality necessarily. So how do you empathize? How do you love them through the midst of it? And how do we as believers support each other in that? Because we've seen, you see it on the news. There's fighting amongst believers in churches on when should we go back to church? When should we meet in person? How do we provide food and clothing and all the necessities for people when we're being told that we should be in isolation or keeping this distance? So it's like I've really seen how we were not, I believe, created to be in isolation. We were not created to exist at a distance from our neighbor. Iron cannot sharpen iron from a distance. Although, we try to do the church service and we try to connect virtually and all of that. But I don't feel like I have a good answer on that, but I feel like that's what's really stirred up in me is just seeing how different we all are and how in that difference that's a good thing, and God doesn't call us to just be all the same, but he does call us to love everybody in the midst of that. So, I got to walk with you and Luis throughout the neighborhood. I got to do, cookouts at the community center, or we would do the podcast, we would do the video streaming for the church. We would do different things, and some people will agree with your tactics or your strategy. Some people will disagree, and I think we've seen some people will disagree for out of love for their fellow mankind, and some out of I don't want to be oppressed by my government. So it's like you really have to evaluate your motivations on, am I doing this to love my neighbor the best I possibly can, or am I succumbing to some lesser ulterior motive, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I was telling some people this morning, one of the big miracles for me over the pandemic was really being able to house the homeless people in the hotel that we did. And when the local emergency management contacted me about this and said, and I said, look, let us organize it. We'll organize it. We'll pay for it, and with the promise that at some point in time we'll get reimbursed. That hasn't happened yet. And I thought that it would be a couple weeks, and I sent out an email saying it would cost about $10,000. And people responded. And I remember in like 48 hours, I had $15,000 that had come in online. And I thought, oh no, what am I going to do? I've got more money than I asked for. Now I got to contact all these people and say, can I spend your money somewhere else? And so I thought, well, I got to put a small thing on every email that says any money left over will go toward this, so I wouldn't have to do that anymore. But it's because I didn't know what I was doing, because it ended up being 35 nights, not a couple weeks. 35 nights, 52 different people in the hotel, buying them one meal a day and paying full price plus a hefty tip to help the restaurants and caterers. And so in 35 nights, it ended up costing $65,000 was how much it cost to house the people for that long. But we raised $67,000, which was like, whoa. And every time I had to write a large check to the hotel, the money was already there. And so I saw that as a miracle that God just provided. And I've told people, when you take care of the least of these, God will provide. And so that was fun. Now, for me personally, the last 3 months have been difficult on a number of different levels, and God has taught me a lot. And some of the things I didn't really like, what he taught me. As I said, I was in Mississippi at a retreat the 1st of March with Christian Community Development Association, which Dr. Perkins was a founder of. So I was at his place with 12 other people, a cohort that we've gotten together, doing some leadership stuff. And then was supposed to go on a cruise with Misty. And when we got to New Orleans, we found out it was canceled. So we spent the weekend in New Orleans, and then came back, and not knowing what to do. I mean, I felt completely lost because I didn't know what the day was supposed to be like. Because now we're not having church. We're supposed to stay socially distant. We can't go to places, and I was lost. I mean, I'm a routine-oriented person, and so I'm out of my routine, not knowing what to do. And so the idea came to me to go do communion on Sundays. But to be quite honest, I just did it because I could not stand the thought of not doing something on Sunday. I couldn't. That just didn't compute in my head that it's Sunday and I'm just supposed to sit around all day and not do anything. And so this idea, let's go do communion. And we tried to practice social distance. We didn't go door to door. You know, it was just people in the neighborhood who were outside, and then some people who I knew, you know, personal relationships. And I asked them, can I come to your house for communion? And they did, and then people started looking for us. And I think, we didn't keep count, but I think it was well over 500 people. Same people every week, but 500 communions, you know, one-on-one. Yeah, or on groups of 3 or 4. You know, it was a couple hours every Sunday, just walking the neighborhood. That it became very, very meaningful, but it started because I had to do something. And so I think what God taught me in that is, and this is a confession, because I think it's a sin, all right? So I'm confessing a sin. But what God taught me was that my identity, who I was wrapped up in what I do and not in Him. And when what I do got taken away, I felt lost. Now that may not make sense to you, but it was a big lesson for me that my identity has to be in Jesus, not what I do. And so the verse of Scripture that kind of came to my mind during all this, and I'll share with you, is Galatians 2, verse 20, where Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me. And over the years, I've told this story a bunch. You may not remember it, but I have told it a bunch, that when I was a young pastor, before I took this pastorate in 1989, I think it was, I took a pastor friend out, an older pastor friend who was kind of a mentor to me, and I took him out to lunch and said, you know, okay, what's the one piece of advice you could give me? And he said, Kevin, always remember this. Your walk with Christ is more important than your work for Christ. And I have said that, and I have said that I believe that. But God showed me that I didn't really believe that, because too much of my self-worth was based in what I do, my work. And that was taken away. And so anyway, so you can pray for me about that, because God's still doing a work on me. He's teaching me humility by leaving the air on heat instead of air conditioning. So He's teaching me humility, but He's also teaching me that, you know what, you are who you are because of Jesus, not what you do or what you don't do. And that was a tough lesson. And hopefully I can remember that. But that said, I'm thrilled to be back. to be back, and this is for me, this is a big deal, just to be back in some type of public worship. And